The crack of a gunshot echoed across the dusty main street of Willow Creek, causing Kathleen Mason to drop the basket of eggs she had purchased not 5 minutes prior. Her heart pounded as she watched them shatter on the ground, yolk and white oozing into the dirt. That was a week's pay gone in an instant, but there was no time to mourn the loss. The commotion around her signaled trouble brewing at the saloon down the road, and like most folks with sense, she needed to get clear. It was 1878 in the Montana Territory, and Kathleen had long ago learned that the safest place during a saloon dispute was anywhere else. She turned to hurry away, but her left leg dragged behind her right the polio that had struck her as a child had left its permanent mark. As she struggled to quicken her pace, she heard the familiar snickers and whispers. "There goes limping Kate, slow as molasses in January," called out Bart Simmons from his post outside the general store. "Best start walking before sunup if you're hoping to make it home by dark," added another voice, followed by cruel laughter. Kathleen gripped her cane tighter, keeping her eyes fixed straight ahead. 6 years of these taunts since arriving in Willow Creek had taught her that acknowledging them only invited more. At 24, she had accepted that some things wouldn't change the limp that marked her every step, the mockery that followed her through town, and the solitude of her small homestead where she lived alone after her parents' passing 2 winters ago. What she hadn't counted on was the stranger who now stepped into her path, a tall figure silhouetted against the afternoon sun. His boots were dust-covered, his Stetson pulled low, but his voice carried a quiet authority that silenced the onlookers. "Seems to me," he said, loud enough for all to hear, "that folks round here have forgotten their manners." The stranger turned to face Kathleen, and she got her first clear look at him. His face was tanned and weathered beneath the shadow of his hat, but his eyes were startlingly kind. He couldn't have been more than 30, with broad shoulders and an easy stance that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin. "Thomas Wainwright, madam," he introduced himself, tipping his hat. "May I help you to your destination?" Before she could respond, another shot rang out from the saloon, followed by shouting. The stranger Thomas looked back over his shoulder. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere less exciting," he suggested with the hint of a smile. Kathleen nodded, still somewhat stunned by his intervention. "I live at the edge of town, the small house past the blacksmith's." "Then that's where we're headed," Thomas said, falling into step beside her. Unlike everyone else she'd ever known, he made no effort to hurry ahead or look impatient as she moved at her own careful pace. Instead, he matched her step for step, slowing his natural gait to accommodate hers. As they walked away from the commotion, Kathleen felt the eyes of the townspeople on them. Thomas must have sensed her discomfort. "Pay them no mind, miss." "Mason, Kathleen Mason," she offered, "and thank you, but you needn't trouble yourself. I'm quite accustomed to making my way alone." "No trouble at all, Miss Mason. The way I see it, I'm new in town and could use a guide. Would you mind terribly showing me the way?" His transparent attempt to preserve her dignity touched something in Kathleen that had long been dormant. She found herself smiling despite the loss of her eggs and the embarrassment of the public mockery. "You're a poor liar, Mr. Wainwright, but I appreciate the sentiment. What brings you to Willow Creek?" "Just passing through," he said, then after a moment added, "Looking for work, actually. I've been riding with cattle drives for the past few years, but I'm of a mind to settle somewhere for a spell." As they approached her small homestead, Kathleen found herself reluctant for their walk to end. Thomas Wainwright was the first person in years who had treated her with genuine respect, who had matched her pace without complaint or pity. "There's the Montgomery Ranch just north of here," she offered. "I hear they're looking for experienced hands for the summer drive." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "I'll look into it tomorrow." He paused at her gate, looking at her modest but well-kept home. "You live here alone?" "Yes," Kathleen answered, suddenly self-conscious. "My parents passed away, the influenza." Thomas removed his hat, holding it respectfully. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Mason. An awkward silence fell between them, neither quite ready to part ways. "Would you care for some tea, Mr. Wainwright? It's the least I can offer for your kindness today." His smile warmed his entire face. "I'd be much obliged, Miss Mason." As Kathleen prepared the tea, her hands trembled slightly. It had been so long since she'd had a visitor, even longer since she'd entertained a man in her home. From the kitchen window, she watched as Thomas examined her small garden with interest, occasionally kneeling to inspect a plant more closely. When she brought the tea outside to the porch where they could catch the afternoon breeze, she found him admiring her row of tomato plants. "You've got quite the green thumb, Miss Mason," he commented, accepting the cup she offered. "It keeps me fed," she replied simply. "The town doesn't exactly welcome my business, so I grow what I can." Thomas's expression darkened. "How long have you lived here?" 6 years. "We came when I was 18, after my father lost our farm in Kansas to drought. He thought the territory would offer a new beginning." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "I suppose he was right, just not the kind we'd hoped for. And no one in town stands up for you, against those insults." Kathleen stared into her tea. "People are uncomfortable with things they don't understand, Mr. Wainwright. My leg makes them uneasy. It's easier to mock than to make an effort." "That doesn't make it right." "No," she agreed softly, "it doesn't." They talked as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across her small property. Thomas told her of his travels across the Western Territories, of cattle drives from Texas to Montana, of the characters he'd met along the way. Kathleen found herself laughing for the first time in months. When he finally rose to leave, promising to check on the ranch job the next day, Kathleen felt a curious mixture of disappointment and hope. "Perhaps I'll see you in town sometime," she ventured. "Count on it, Miss Mason," Thomas replied, settling his hat back on his head. "And thank you for the tea. Best I've had in years." As she watched him walk away, Kathleen wondered if she'd ever see him again. Men like Thomas Wainwright didn't typically linger in the lives of women like her. But true to his word, Thomas appeared at her gate the very next afternoon, his horse tied to the fence post. "I got the job," he announced with a grin. "Starting tomorrow." Kathleen couldn't help matching his smile. "Congratulations. The Montgomerys are fair employers." "They mentioned you," Thomas said, his expression turning serious. "Said you used to teach their children before the school was built." Kathleen nodded, surprised. "Yes, for a couple of years. Mrs. Montgomery was kind enough to recommend me to other families, but—" She trailed off, not wanting to revisit old wounds. "But some folks couldn't see past your leg to recognize your mind," Thomas finished for her. His directness was refreshing, no pity, just understanding. "Something like that," she acknowledged. "Well, I've convinced the Montgomerys to let me stay in their old line shack rather than the bunkhouse. It's closer to town." He hesitated, then added, "Closer to here, actually." Kathleen felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Is that so?" "It is. And I was wondering if you might consider another exchange of services." Her eyebrows rose in question. "I noticed your roof could use some patching before the summer storms hit. I'm handy with repairs. In exchange, perhaps you could help me improve my reading." "Never had much schooling on the trail." Kathleen studied him carefully. "You're offering a fair trade, not charity." "Absolutely. My reading's embarrassing for a man my age, and that roof won't fix itself." She found herself nodding before she'd fully thought it through. "Very well, Mr. Wainwright. You have yourself a deal." And so began a routine that would carry them through the spring and into summer. 3 evenings a week, Thomas would arrive at Kathleen's home after his work at the ranch. They would spend an hour with books. Kathleen was pleased to discover that while his reading needed refinement, Thomas was quick to learn and had a natural intelligence that formal education had never polished. After their lessons, Thomas would work on whatever repairs her small homestead needed. The roof was patched within the first week, but he found plenty more to occupy his hands: a loose board on the porch, a window that wouldn't shut properly, a chicken coop that needed reinforcing against foxes. As the weeks passed, Kathleen began to notice subtle changes in her interactions with the townspeople. The mocking comments didn't cease entirely, but they diminished in frequency and viciousness. She attributed it partly to Thomas's growing presence in her life, and partly to an incident at the general store, where he had quietly but firmly confronted Bart Simmons. "Miss Mason is owed the same respect as any lady in this town," he had stated, his voice carrying the unmistakable edge of a man who wouldn't be trifled with. "I'd appreciate it if you'd remember that in the future." By mid-June, their arrangement had evolved into something neither had anticipated. They still maintained the pretense of their exchange lessons for repairs, but both knew the truth. Thomas finished his work at the ranch as quickly as possible each day, and Kathleen found herself watching the road for his approach long before he was due to arrive. One evening, as they sat on her porch after a particularly satisfying reading session with Ivanhoe, Thomas broached a subject they had both been avoiding. "The Montgomerys are hosting a dance this Saturday, celebrating their anniversary," he said, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and pink. "I thought perhaps you might like to attend. With me." Kathleen felt her heart leap, then sink just as quickly. "I don't dance, Thomas." He turned to look at her directly. "I don't much care for dancing myself, but I'd like your company all the same. People will talk. People always talk. Question is, do we give them that power over us?" Kathleen twisted her hands in her lap. "It's different for you. You can leave any time. This is my home. I have to live with their judgment." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Do you know why I stayed in Willow Creek, Kathleen?" She shook her head. "I've been drifting for most of my life, never felt the need to put down roots anywhere. But that first day when I saw you holding your head high despite those fools mocking you, I saw something rare, genuine courage, and when we walked together and I matched your pace, something just felt right." Kathleen swallowed hard, afraid to believe what she was hearing. "I'm not asking you to dance," Thomas continued softly. "I'm asking you to let me stand beside you in public, proud to be seen with the strongest woman I've ever known." Tears pricked at Kathleen's eyes. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple. The rest is just noise." He reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his calloused one. "Come to the dance with me. We'll go at your pace always." The night of the Montgomery dance arrived clear and warm, stars pricking the velvet sky above the ranch. Kathleen had spent hours preparing, wearing her best dress, a blue cotton that brought out her eyes, and arranging her hair in a style she hadn't attempted in years. Thomas arrived at her door looking transformed. Gone were the dusty work clothes, replaced by clean dark trousers, a pressed white shirt, and a vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. He'd even trimmed his beard and slicked back his usually unruly hair. "You look beautiful," he said simply when she opened the door. "As do you," she replied with a small smile, then blushed at her boldness. Thomas offered his arm. "Shall we?" The journey to the Montgomery ranch was slow but steady. True to his word, Thomas matched her pace without comment, occasionally pointing out constellations in the night sky as they walked. Kathleen felt her anxiety rise as they approached the brightly lit barn where the dance was being held. Music and laughter spilled out into the night, and wagons and horses from all over the county lined the property. "We don't have to stay long," Thomas reassured her, sensing her tension. "No," Kathleen said, straightening her shoulders. "I want to be here with you." Their entrance caused a momentary lull in conversation, heads turning to observe the unexpected pair. Kathleen tightened her grip on Thomas's arm, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. Mrs. Montgomery broke the tension, coming forward with genuine warmth. "Kathleen, I'm so pleased you could join us. And Mr. Wainwright, how wonderful." Her gracious welcome eased the way, and soon they were settled at a table near the edge of the dance floor, punch in hand, watching the festivities. Occasionally someone would stop by to exchange pleasantries, usually friends of the Montgomerys who remembered Kathleen fondly from her teaching days. As the evening progressed, Kathleen found herself relaxing, enjoying the music and Thomas's company. When a slow waltz began, Thomas turned to her with a question in his eyes. "I meant what I said about not dancing," she reminded him gently. "I know," he replied, "but I was thinking we might try something different." He stood and offered his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Kathleen took it, allowing him to lead her to a quiet corner near the musicians. There, partially hidden by shadows, Thomas placed one hand lightly at her waist and held her other hand in his. "We'll just sway," he murmured. "No steps to follow, just feel the music." And so they did, barely moving from their spot, Thomas supporting her weight whenever her bad leg threatened to buckle. It wasn't dancing as others knew it, but in that moment, swaying gently in Thomas's arms, Kathleen felt more graceful than she ever had in her life. When the music ended, she looked up to find Thomas gazing at her with such tenderness that her breath caught. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," he replied softly. "Thank you for trusting me." The ride home was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts about the evening. When they reached Kathleen's gate, Thomas helped her down from the borrowed wagon and walked her to her door. "I'd say our first social outing was a success," he ventured with a smile. "It was," Kathleen agreed. "Though I suspect we gave the gossips plenty to chew on," Thomas chuckled. "Let them chew. I had a wonderful time with a wonderful woman, that's all that matters to me." In the soft glow of the porch lantern, Kathleen found the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind all evening. "Thomas, why me?" "There are plenty of women who would be happy to have your attention, women without complications." His expression grew serious. "Do you know what I see when I look at you, Kathleen?" She shook her head. "I see someone who refuses to be defined by other people's limitations. Someone who creates beauty in her garden despite having every reason to be bitter. Someone who taught herself to stand strong in a world that constantly tries to knock her down." He took a step closer. "I see the woman I've fallen in love with." Kathleen's heart seemed to stop, then race forward. "Love? Yes, love," he confirmed, his voice steady and sure. "I didn't come to Willow Creek looking for it, but I found it all the same, in you." Tears welled in Kathleen's eyes. I never dared hope that someone could love me as I am." Thomas reached up to gently brush a tear from her cheek. "I don't love you despite how you are, Kathleen. I love you because of who you are. Every part." In the weeks that followed the Montgomery dance, Kathleen and Thomas's relationship blossomed in ways that surprised them both. Their reading lessons continued, though they spent as much time discussing the stories as they did practicing Thomas's skills. He proved to have a natural insight that compensated for his lack of formal education, often seeing connections in the text that even Kathleen had missed. The town's attitude toward Kathleen began to shift as well. It started subtly, Mrs. Peterson from the bakery offering her the freshest bread when she came in, rather than yesterday's leftovers. Mr. Crowley at the general store carrying her purchases to the wagon without being asked. Small gestures, but significant in their departure from years of indifference or outright hostility. Some, like Bart Simmons, remained stubbornly committed to their cruelty, but their voices grew increasingly isolated as others in the community began to see Kathleen through new eyes, not as limping Kate, but as the woman who had captured the heart of Thomas Wainwright, one of the most respected cowboys at the Montgomery ranch. In July, as summer reached its peak, Thomas approached Kathleen with an unexpected proposition. "The Montgomerys are expanding their operation," he explained one evening as they sat on her porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "They've purchased the old Hoffman place to the east, but the house needs work before winter. They've asked me to oversee the repairs." "That's wonderful," Kathleen said sincerely. "They clearly value your skills." "There's more," Thomas continued, a nervous edge to his voice. "They've offered me the position of foreman for the eastern section of their property. It would mean a permanent position, better pay, and—" He hesitated. "The use of the house once it's repaired." Kathleen felt her heart constrict. "You'd be moving away from town." "About 5 miles," Thomas confirmed. But I've been thinking, Kathleen, that house is too big for just one person. It has room for a family." She stared at him, afraid to interpret his meaning. "Thomas," he shifted in his chair to face her directly. "I'm not a man who believes in wasting time once my mind's made up, and my mind's been made up about you since that first day we walked together." From his pocket, he withdrew a small box, weathered but well cared for. "This was my mother's. She gave it to me before she passed, told me to save it for the woman who made me want to stop wandering." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small pearl set into the center. "Kathleen Mason, I love you. I love your strength, your patience, your gentle heart. I love the way you face each day with quiet courage. I want to build a life with you, a real life, not just stolen evenings on your porch." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me?" Kathleen stared at the ring, then at Thomas's earnest face. All her life, she had adapted to limitations, physical ones imposed by her condition, social ones imposed by others' perceptions. She had accepted that certain dreams were beyond her reach, marriage among them. Yet here was this man, this remarkable man, offering her not just marriage but a partnership of equals. "Are you certain?" she whispered. "I'll never be able to keep up with you, not physically." Thomas's expression softened. "I told you once, and I'll tell you again, I'll match your pace always, Kathleen. We'll walk through life together, side by side, at whatever speed suits us both." He took her hand in his. "I don't need a wife who can run alongside me. I need a woman who makes me want to slow down and appreciate the journey." Tears spilled onto Kathleen's cheeks as years of carefully guarded hopes suddenly blossomed into possibilities. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Yes, Thomas, I will marry you." The wedding took place in September, when the aspen leaves had turned to gold, and the air carried the first hints of autumn. It was a small affair, held in the Montgomery's garden, with Mrs. Montgomery fussing over Kathleen like a mother hen and Mr. Montgomery standing proudly as Thomas's best man. To Kathleen's surprise, nearly half the town attended. Some came out of genuine goodwill, others perhaps out of curiosity, but their presence marked a turning point in her relationship with the community that had once shunned her. As she made her careful way down the makeshift aisle on Mr. Montgomery's arm, Kathleen's eyes never left Thomas. He stood waiting for her, handsome in his new suit, his face alight with a joy that mirrored her own. When she reached him, Thomas leaned in to whisper, "You're right on time." The simple ceremony bound them together as husband and wife, and the celebration afterward was filled with good food, better company, and the kind of genuine happiness that neither Kathleen nor Thomas had dared to imagine for themselves before finding each other. As evening approached and the newlyweds prepared to depart for their new home, the renovated Hoffman place that Thomas had spent the last 2 months transforming, Mrs. Montgomery pulled Kathleen aside. "I always knew you were special, my dear," she said, clasping Kathleen's hands in her own. "Even when you were just a shy young woman teaching my children their letters. I'm so pleased you found a man worthy of you." Kathleen blinked back tears. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Montgomery. For the teaching opportunity all those years ago, for bringing Thomas into my life, for this beautiful wedding." "Nonsense," the older woman interrupted with a wave of her hand. "You two found each other through your own merits. All Richard and I did was provide the stage." Her eyes twinkled. "Though I must admit, when Thomas first asked about staying in the lined shack rather than the bunkhouse, I had my suspicions about his motives." Kathleen laughed, a free and joyous sound that would have been unimaginable to her just months earlier. Their new home awaited them as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the rolling grassland. Thomas had outdone himself with the renovations, paying special attention to details that would make life easier for Kathleen. Wide doorways, a ground-floor bedroom, smooth pathways between buildings. As they approached the house, Thomas surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "Thomas," she exclaimed, clinging to his neck. "What are you doing?" Carrying my bride across the threshold, he replied with a grin. It's tradition. I'm not exactly light as a feather, she protested, though secretly pleased by the gesture. You're perfect, he countered, kissing her forehead as he carried her up the porch steps and through the front door. Inside, he set her down gently in the center of their new home. Kathleen looked around in wonder. The house was simple but beautiful, with polished wood floors, fresh paint on the walls, and curtains that she recognized as having been sewn by Mrs. Montgomery. You like it? Thomas asked, a touch of nervousness in his voice. Like it, Thomas, it's magnificent. She turned to face him, overwhelmed by emotion. I never thought I'd have this: a real home, a husband who loves me, a future filled with possibilities instead of limitations. Thomas gathered her in his arms. You deserve all of it and more, my love. And I plan to spend the rest of my days making sure you never doubt that again. Their life together unfolded in a rhythm uniquely their own. Thomas's work as foreman kept him busy, but allowed him to be home each night. Kathleen established a new garden that soon became the envy of neighboring farms, and at Mrs. Montgomery's urging, began tutoring children from surrounding homesteads who couldn't make the daily journey to the town school. Word of her skill as a teacher spread, and by the following spring, Kathleen had a small but thriving class of students who came to their home 3 days a week. Thomas built her a proper schoolroom off the main house, complete with bookshelves he crafted himself and a blackboard ordered specially from Denver. The cruel nicknames of Willow Creek became a distant memory as Kathleen found her place in their new community. She was now Mrs. Wainwright, the schoolteacher with the green thumb and the kind smile. If people noticed her limp at all, it was merely as an unremarkable part of who she was, not the defining characteristic that had once shadowed her every interaction. On their first anniversary, Thomas presented her with a gift: a beautiful mare, gentle-natured and specially trained to accommodate a rider with limited mobility. Her name is Patience, he told Kathleen as he helped her mount. The trainer said she's the calmest horse he's ever worked with. Kathleen, who had not ridden since her childhood in Kansas, felt tears of gratitude well in her eyes. She's perfect, Thomas, but I'm afraid I'll be very slow. Thomas mounted his own horse and guided it alongside hers. We'll go at your pace, Kathleen, always. Besides, he added with a wink, the view's better when you take the time to look around. They rode together across the rolling Montana landscape, the autumn sun warm on their backs, their shadows stretching long across the golden grass. It wasn't a fast journey, but it was joyous and free in a way Kathleen had never imagined possible. As they crested a small hill overlooking their home, Thomas reined his horse to a stop beside hers. Happy? He asked, studying her face in the late afternoon light. Kathleen looked out over the land they shared, the home they had built, the life they were creating together. She thought of the long, lonely years before Thomas, when she had convinced herself that happiness was something that happened to other people. She thought of his promise to match her pace always, a promise he had kept faithfully through every step of their journey. More than I ever dreamed possible, she answered truthfully. Thomas reached across the space between them to take her hand. This is just the beginning, my love. We have a lifetime of moments like this ahead of us. As they rode home together, side by side at a pace that suited them both, Kathleen knew he was right. Their story, unlikely as it had once seemed, was still being written, one careful step at a time.